This lecture is your introduction to the circulatory system, specifically the tubes. So when we are discussing blood circulation, there are two separate systems then, and they are known as systemic circulation and pulmonary circulation. So systemic circulation then carries blood between the heart and the rest of the body, except for the lungs. So, blood going to and from your brain, to and from your toes, to and from everything else is known as systemic circulation. And the one exception then is the pulmonary circulation, which carries blood between the heart and the lungs. So any of the blood vessels having to do with taking blood between the heart and the lungs, those are all one way or another pulmonary blood vessels. So that's some terminology you need to know. Other terminology you need to know is the word arteries, or a singular artery. The one definition for arteries that works every time is that arteries carry blood away from the heart. And because the heart is pushing the blood along here, arteries will have walls that are thick and elastic. So that's your definition of arteries. They carry blood away from the heart. Then there are veins, and these carry blood to the heart. So we have big arteries and we have big veins. Other terminology you need to know, however, is arterioles. So what happens is that you have big arteries, like the aorta, for instance, but then the arteries divide and subdivide then to form smaller and smaller arteries. And the smallest arteries are called arterioles. So that then is how you get the term venules. You have the same concept with veins, where you have large veins that are in fact what the blood flows into from ever smaller and smaller veins. And your smallest veins then are called venules. So these then are the smallest subdivisions of veins. So you have arterioles, your smallest arteries. You have venules, the smallest veins. How does the blood get between one and the other? This, of course, is where your capillaries come in. So the capillaries then go like this. Your arterioles and your venules are connected by networks of microscopic capillaries. And capillaries are so narrow then that red blood cells go through in single file, and that's why they work. It's because you wind up having these oxygen-carrying red blood cells pushed right up against the walls of the capillaries so that the oxygen can leave the red blood cells. The CO2 can attach onto the red blood cells. So as I said, the red blood cells pass through the capillaries in single file, and the thin walls of the capillaries then allow for the exchange of dissolved nutrients, wastes, and gases. Specifically, of course, oxygen and carbon dioxide. So this is where the real work of the circulatory system takes place, here in the capillaries, where you wind up having all of that stuff that blood does for us actually happening. So your capillaries, despite their microscopic size, are actually your most important blood vessels. Everything else, all those other tubes, are basically plumbing, getting the blood to the capillaries. Okay, so I'm going to talk about just a few specific blood vessels in this lecture. Much more on that will be done in later lectures. But just briefly, we have coronary vessels, which is a blanket term. This is the branch of the circulatory system. that supplies blood to the muscle of the heart. Now, this is an important concept to understand. It can seem weird because we have blood flowing through the heart at gallons per minute. But that blood does not do the heart itself any good. Remember, the heart is a working muscle. It's using oxygen all the time. It's using nutrients all the time. And all that blood passing through it does not do those working heart cells any good. Like any other organ or muscle in your body, it needs special blood vessels that go to it and supply it, just like your bicep has arteries and veins supplying it with blood and taking the blood away. Same thing with your heart. It's a muscle, and it winds up having blood vessels, arteries, and veins that serve it. Now, another just sort of general introductory term, you've seen this already, is the aorta. This is the largest artery in the body, and blood flows out of the left ventricle, as you know, into the aorta. And then we have the superior and inferior vena cavas. Okay, so these are the largest veins in the body. So the superior then, and you will sometimes see this abbreviated then as SVC. So the superior vena cava then returns blood from the head, arms, and chest to the heart. And then the inferior vena cava, sometimes abbreviated that way, returns blood from the lower body regions to the heart. And that is the end of this lecture on your introduction to blood circulation.